Transforming hurt boys into restored men. Uh, the lack of mental health treatment for black male trauma survivors. Our speaker for this hour will be Dr. Sharika Smith. She is a mental health coordinator with the School of Social Work in Fayette County, Kentucky Public Schools, and she's also the co-owner of Wellness Within. Ms. Smith?
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for hanging in with us. You know, after lunch is always a little hit or miss for presenters and participants. So I thank you all so much. I have never been to this conference. This is my first time, but I am hooked. So it will not be my last time here. I've met so many amazing people. The last time I was actually in Mississippi was 2 years after post-Hurricane Katrina. I came down with my grad program from the University of Louisville to help rebuild Indy Iberville. And I didn't realize how close it was until I got to talk to Wallace. And so how ironic for me to be back in this area speaking about a topic that is near and dear to this area, right? Trauma. So I, again, appreciate you all just kind of tuning in. I think a lot of the information, especially for us in this room, there's some information, of course, that will be new. There's some that you all have heard before. It might be old. But no matter what, I really hope that this information is useful for everyone, whether you're a clinician, a spouse, a parent, an educator. I think any information in this presentation, especially when we talk about our black men, is going to be useful for you in whatever role that you're in. So I appreciate you all being here. All right, so when we kind of talk about passion, right, I get a lot of questions about, well, what led you to this work? Why are you talking about black men and trauma? I realize, I do acknowledge that mental health needs are across cultures, right, are across genders. But I'm talking about who and what's on fire right now. And then for me, that my passion is black men, black boys, who are just refusing to seek mental health treatment for different reasons we'll talk about. But also just the disparities when we talk about mental health treatment for that population. I grew up in a home myself where my house was loving, everybody loved each other. We sat around the dinner table or sat on the floor. Somebody said chicken nuggets and tater tots. We ate plenty of those together. But what we didn't do was talk about, well, how's your mental health today, right? How are things going mentally? Because that's just not what black families do. That's not what black families have been doing. And so I want to just kind of talk to you all today about normalizing mental health within black families and how important it is. And when we talk about that, that's why it's passionate for me. Because I do know black men who are suffering as adults because they did not get the treatment that they needed as children. Okay? I do work with black men who are suffering as adults because they endured traumatic situations as children and did not get the help they need. So that's why it is important for me. When I was at the University of Kentucky doing my doctorate work, that's what I chose to do, this research project. I, again, just kept meeting a lot of people with the same stories, a lot of people with very similar situations, and so I think it's just been, great to kind of meet people and just try to help. What I want to talk about today, of course, we always have to go back to what trauma truly is. And so again, that part might be a little review for you, but the most important part is really getting down to the nitty-gritty of what trauma looks like in all households. It's different between you and me. What's traumatic to myself might not be traumatic to you all. And so really kind of digging down into that. Many of us as adults, we do go through traumatic situations, but hopefully by now we have learned those coping skills. We have learned how to, get the help that we need. We've learned how to be able to live with or live through those traumatic situations that we go through. But imagining a child going through trauma, right? Imagining a young black boy going through a situation that he may or may not have the skills to deal with, and then being with parents or guardians who don't really want to, or maybe don't know how to get him that help that he needs, right? So then we're going to talk about why black male trauma survivors rarely seek mental health treatment. Why? All right. I'll talk a little bit about my own personal experience as a therapist, as a mental health therapist, and how very, very few black male clients that I had, and really trying to figure out what the issue is. And then finally, what I hope that we can learn from today is how we can help. Like I said, everyone in this room, whatever role that you're in, you do have a role to play. And there's something that you can take from this presentation so we can help with this topic. So again, like I said, trauma is all about perception, right? I am a mental health coordinator for the Fayette County Public School System in Lexington, Kentucky. So what that comes with is crisis counseling, being the crisis team lead. So when we lose a student, when we lose a staff member to death, we do send out grief counselors to the schools. So one thing that I've learned is not to expect everyone to have the same reaction to a traumatic event, okay? We responded to a horrible situation in a nearby neighborhood. Kids were playing on a playground. Shots were fired literally hundreds of feet, hundreds of yards away. The kids had to run for safety. The ambulance and the police came. People were injured, I think even murdered. And so the crisis team responded the next day thinking, oh my gosh, these kids have been traumatized. They're going to need all of the support that we can get. So we show up as the crisis team, right, ready to deal with this traumatic situation. We have some students who were absolutely devastated. My grandmother was in that area. I was nervous for my life. I had to run for my life. I was scared. And then we had another group of kids that said, I hear this every day, right? This isn't, I'm fine. Can I go play on the monkey bars? So this team that's going to save these children's lives from this traumatic event, we come in and, again, just a reminder that what's traumatic to one set of people or one person is not always traumatic for another. So for today, trauma, I'm trying to see which screen to look at, I'm sorry. We're going to just define this as when someone's overwhelmed by an event and responds with intense fear, horror, or helplessness. And a lot of times those common traumatic events that we talk about are accidents, neglect, acts of violence, physical and sexual abuse. But what's important about this is Black people endure traumatic experiences at a much higher rate than their white counterparts, yet they seek mental health treatment less. Okay? And all of my research either came from SAMHSA or the CDC, which you will be able to receive those sources at the end. And so this is a key point to think about. Like, if we know that trauma occurs more frequently, in this population, why are they seeking mental health treatment less? And that's the question that I want to answer today. So even more specifically, when we talk about trauma from, just aside from the big nuggets, if you will, of trauma, the accidents, the physical and sexual abuse, we also have to talk about what trauma looks like for Black families. Okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this. Every Black family did not experience these things on here. Okay? I'm not saying this is every Black family. But what I am saying is we have to acknowledge that this is true in a lot of Black families. Okay? So the first thing, poverty and economic hardship. I'm really sorry if that's hard to see. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about financial insecurity, food insecurity, lack of access to quality health care and education. Right? A lot of these situations are very, very traumatic. Imagine not knowing what, you're going to feed your children from one day to the next. That's why I work in the school system, like I said before. When school is out, we all freak out because we're like, well, dang, they come here for their lights. They come here for their food. They come here for comfort, right? Not all families, but some. Then we have to acknowledge that there's community violence at higher rates in our Black families. And I could go down a whole nother road about neighborhoods, but and what that looks like sometimes is exposure to gun violence at a very young age. I know in my city, my community, we are having a huge issue with gangs and recruitment at a very young age, right? And who are they attacking? Those neighborhoods that have not been poured into. Gang activity, drug-related crimes. So that's another specific area of trauma that some of our Black families have experienced. Systemic racism, which are experiences of discrimination, racial profiling, police brutality. I know everybody in this room has seen a news story or heard a news story about something about that, right? Anything in that box. Historical trauma. We have this legacy, this history of slavery, segregation, systemic oppression. And as I call it history, I'm actually thinking this is the present, sadly, right? Moving on from that, generational trauma. So we got to talk about the effects of how trauma is passed down through generations, okay? My mom my mom's mom, my mom's mom's mom, right? My dad, his family. Sometimes those situations pass down, especially if we don't know what to do to treat that. So again, this is not the picture of every black family, but this is in addition to, right? Different aspects of your big, your go-tos when we talk about what traumatic situations look like. So just a couple of statistics specifically about black males, because like I said before, that was my focus. That's my passion right now. 62% in the study that I found of black males have been directly affected or impacted. They actually experienced a traumatic event. 62%. These are a little out of order. Hold on. 72% black males actually witnessed a traumatic event. Okay, so we have some that actually are experiencing these things, some that only witness it, not only, because that's still traumatic. But look at the percentage of black males who seek mental health treatment, who do not seek mental health treatment. 56 to 74%. We'll talk about this statistic a little bit later, but only 18% of the American Counseling Association is made up of minority practitioners. Okay? So a lot of these statistics are kind of leading into the why, all right? But before we go into the why, we got to talk about what childhood trauma, untreated childhood trauma, what it looks like, how it affects our young boys, and how sometimes it can affect our adults. So when we talk about trauma in black males, it can lead to significant impact in childhood. We're talking about academic struggles and failures. How many of you all in this room know a black student who is just refusing everything and everybody, failing, most likely about to drop out, and it's not because of skill. It's not because of lack of knowledge. It's not because he doesn't understand or he's not smart. It's because of all that other stuff that we can't figure out. All that other stuff where no one is sitting him down and asking him, what happened to you? But all we're really doing is saying, what did you do wrong, right? What did you do? So shifting that mindset is super important when we talk about trauma, especially because we see it firsthand in our schools with academic struggles, failures, dropouts. Some other impacts, juvenile justice involvement. The school district that I work at, we have an alternative program that sadly has a reputation. That's where all the bad kids go, right? When you get kicked out of your traditional high school, a lot of times you get sent to this particular school. I don't know how many black and brown boys are in that building because they've acted out, because they didn't know how to deal with a traumatic situation, right? And again, if someone would have just sat them down and said, I know what happened, I know what's going on, let's try to help this way, right? As opposed to a quick punishment, a quick expulsion, get out of my building, right? If we think of our penal system, which I'll go into that a little bit later, but the number of black and brown men who are in jail, in prison, because of one mistake they made out of just emotions and not knowing what that looks like, not knowing how to deal with that emotion. Another possible impact or effect is that social or relationship issue. You know, I know a lot of young black boys who just don't really know how to make friends. I'm going to push you down, and maybe you'll like me then. Just not having those skills and not really learning those skills to trust people. We'll talk about trust a lot later on, because if you don't have it, you know, who am I going to listen to? Who am I going to learn from if I don't even trust you? Because most likely the people who are surrounding me in that school building don't look like me. And my mama told me not to trust you, right? So when trauma is untreated in childhood, a lot of times it affects what happens in our adult life. So a higher risk for poor outcomes in adulthood. And it looks like post-traumatic stress disorder. We all know what some of those signs and symptoms are, PTSD. It also looks like depression. And what we know about males is when they are depressed, what do? Yes, they lash out. They become angry, sometimes volatile. I'm not going to say violent because we're not going to, correlate violence with that, but they can become volatile. And then, instead of me treating you for depression, I'm kicking you out of my building because I'm dealing with the behavior, not what's underneath that. Another outcome, substance abuse. A lot of times when Black males finally say, okay, you're right, I need some assistance. We're met with resistance. They're met with discrimination and bias. And so they're like, okay, never mind, forget it. I'm going to go home and I'm going to self-medicate, which a lot of times is substance abuse. I'm going to mask my symptoms, which eventually comes out in some of these ways. And then finally, violence perpetration and dangerous sexual behaviors. So again, we know what is happening with our young people. We know that the signs and symptoms are there. We know that if they don't get treated, sometimes in adulthood, this is what we can see in our black men, right? Not all trauma survivors experience this, but going specifically into each of those, our incarceration rates, that's what we'll do next. The United States, we hold the record of the highest population in prison globally. Way to go, United States, good job. When we dig deeper into that, we know that there's an extreme prevalence of traumatic situations, like I said before, in those juvenile detention centers and in prisons. Statistics show that the rate of imprisonment for black males is 6 times higher than white men. And the higher trauma experiences equal the higher risk of criminality. So I basically just pointed and painted our prisons for you. I just painted our juvenile detention centers for you. But I also reminded you that a lot of times the reason that those boys are in there is because of an untreated traumatic situation, right? So moving on more deeper into depression and PTSD, 22.4% of black people reported having a serious mental illness. There was an increase in black people with suicidal thoughts, plans, and attempts. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this. When I was growing up, suicide was a white man's disease, right? Well, oh, no, we would never do that. The Lord said, growing up in a black family, suicide was not, that was a no-no. But now, right, as I grow up, as I study, as I learn more about this, it's across races, it's across genders, it's across, it's not a white thing. We have more black young men dying by suicide than ever. And so that's something that we have to acknowledge. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for men aged 25 to 34. That's right after high school. That's, your life is supposed to be just beginning, right? But instead, it's the 3rd leading cause of death for that age group. Black men reported sadness and hopelessness more often than white men. And again, like we said before, it looks like anger, aggression, defiance, which kind of is that cycle, because now we're talking about going back to punitive measures to deal with that instead of mental health. For this, with drugs, it's kind of difficult because sometimes if it's an overdose, you don't know if it's a suicide. Yeah. Regular accidents, quote unquote, are a higher cause of death, and that includes car accidents and drug overdoses that weren't by suicide. But when we talk about substance abuse, black men with mental illness admitted to binge drinking and misusing illicit drugs more frequently. Sorry, that's really small, so I'm reading it to you. Discrimination associated with higher odds of illicit drug use. So when you are dealing with men who are discriminated against, the statistics show that they go to drugs, higher risk. Adults admitting to a childhood abuse showed an increase in binge drinking. In between 2015 and 2020, the overdose rate more than tripled, surpassing that rate of white men. So this right here is very astonishing to me, right? We talk about black men not getting mental health treatment, but the research shows that the rates of seeking treatment for substance abuse was equal between black men and white men. But it's about the completion rate, right? Because when black men finally got into the treatment programs, they were more likely to face delays, first of all. They were more likely to have their treatment ended by the facility earlier, terminated. They're less likely to be prescribed a medication that significantly reduces overdoses. So we finally get them into treatment, and then they're met with discrimination. So because we know the outcomes of possibly what happens when childhood trauma is not treated, we have to ask ourselves why, right? Why aren't our black men, our black families seeking out mental health treatment? I know that a lot of us already know a lot of these answers, but the 3 quotes that I have heard black men say, that's kind of how I'm going to answer this question. The first one, real men don't cry, right? We all know that that is about stigma. You turn on the TV and you see, I was going to say macho men, you see men who are afraid to show their emotions, and if so, it's frowned upon. You're weak. You're not a real man if you cry, if you show emotions. The next quote, you'll never understand me. What does that mean to a black man, right? If he says that to a therapist, or if he says that to someone who's trying to help him, you'll never understand me. In my mind, that means you don't come from where I come from. You're not even listening to what I'm saying, the story that I'm giving you. You can't be in my shoes, right? And then finally, you don't hear me. I finally come to your office. I'm telling you one thing, and you're treating me like another person, with something else. So specifically about the real men don't cry, we talked about the stigma in the black community. Again, like I said before, we don't have regular conversations around the dinner table about mental health, but it is our job to normalize mental health in those communities. Okay? I remember when COVID first started, I had this grand idea to start seeing clients over telehealth. That was the first time I ever did private practice. Didn't last very long, but anyway. I worked for an amazing agency. The agency was great. For the 2 years that I did mental health treatment via telehealth during that COVID time, I never saw a black male client over 2 years. The very first time I did, there was a young boy. The only reason why he was there is because his mom was threatened with Child Protective Services if she didn't take him to a therapist. That was the only time. Okay? Now, fast forward, after I got my doctorate after COVID, I had another bright idea to open up a private practice with a co-owner, and we opened up, she's another black female, a private practice, the 2 of us, black, minority-owned, women-owned, so proud, woo-hoo. She still owns it, I don't, because my own mental health. But once we established that, the black families, the black men and women and children were coming in. It was amazing to see, okay? Now, I'm not saying you have to be black to treat black people, but you do have to have some type of understanding, some type of awareness. You have to be able to be open to hearing a different story and not painting your own for another family, okay? So again, I think that is telling, especially because of what the stigma is around around mental health. So I do want to really quickly raise your hand if you have heard someone in your family tell you that what happens in this family stays in this family. Mm-hmm. Look around the room. The majority of black hands are up, if not all, because that's just what mama and daddy and granny and auntie and uncle said, all right? But the issue is, a lot of times that just limited us to the resources that we truly needed, because sometimes it has to come out of the family. Sorry, it just does, right? And then a lot of times we, as black families, turn to churches, and we just think that we can pray our symptoms away, right? Now, I think the Lord is amazing. We are besties, but I also think He gave us amazing providers and amazing resources for helping our black families, right? And so pairing those together, I think we also have to use that in our churches to normalize mental health. So, how many of you all have heard this song? I have heard it a million times. I sing it at the top of my lungs every time it comes on. I won't do that for you today. But not until I started doing this research did I actually look at the lyrics, did I actually read the lyrics and hear the lyrics, okay? So I'm going to play this, just a couple of verses for everybody. I want you to read along. If you sing along, I will not judge. Those at home, you are more than welcome to sing along because nobody can hear you. But please read these lyrics as you hear this. after a little quick commercial break from our sponsor.
Oh, man, listen up. Keep your eyes on those monitors. So if somebody breaks out your favorite chew toy, you look at the monitor. And if somebody just happens to have an Eastern Gray squirrel, you look at the monitor.
At least it wasn't anything inappropriate. That was a gamble.
In theaters Friday.
You can't see the lyrics, just listen.
I was told the true definition of a man was to never cry, work till you're tired, got to provide, always be the rock for my fam, protect them by all means, and give you the things that you need, baby. Our relationship is suffering, trying to give you what I never had. You say I don't know how to love you, babe. Well, I say show me the way. I keep my feelings deep inside, I shadow them with my pride. I'm trying desperately, baby, just work with me. Show me the way to surrender my heart. Girl, I'm so lost. Yeah. Teach me how to love. Yeah. How I can get my emotions involved. Yeah. Teach me, show me how to love. Show me the way to surrender my heart. Girl, I'm so lost. Teach me how to love. How I can get my emotions involved. Yeah. Teach me how to love. I was always taught to be strong. Never let them think you care at all. Let no one get close to me before you and me. I done shared things with you, girl, about my past that I'd never tell to anyone else. Just keep it to myself. Girl, I know I lack affection and expressing my feelings. It took me a minute to come and admit this, but see, I'm really trying to change now. Wanna love you better, show me how. I'm trying desperately, baby, please work with me.
All right. Oh, sorry. That was a good part. I'm telling you, the number of times I've listened to that song, and it's his cry for help, right? He is literally saying, my entire life, I was told to be a rock, provide for my family, not show any emotions. Now, I'm assuming, he's talking to a female who he's trying to love, and he's not doing a very good job of it. But he's begging, okay, teach me, because I don't know how. Teach me, because that's not what I learned, right? Show me how to get my emotions involved. Teach me. And so I saw this song when I was kind of doing my research. I think I heard it one day, and I was like, ooh, I need to add that. Because it is the perfect depiction of what a lot of our black men are saying and are going through and are feeling, right? So B.B. Moore Campbell, I think this quote also is perfect. People of color, particularly African Americans, feel the stigma more keenly. In a race-conscious society, some don't want to be perceived as having yet another deficit. So, picking this apart, the first three words, the people of color, right? Automatically, our black men are born with two strikes. You're born male, you're born black. Strike two, okay? All of a sudden, I have this traumatic situation, and you want me to ask for help and give me yet another strike? It's not going to happen, right? A lot of our black men are like, absolutely not. I'm already fighting to make it to the top, having been born black and male, sadly. All right? And that's what our society does to our black men. So I love that quote. I think it truly does embody exactly what we're talking about today. So digging deeper into that second quote, you'll never understand me. I think it is it's hard to acknowledge, but we have to acknowledge the mistrust when it comes to our black families and medical professionals, period, okay? We also have to remember that there's just not enough of us in medical professions, in therapy professions, counseling professions. Again, you don't have to be black to treat black people, but a lot of our black men are saying, you just don't understand, all right? So thinking about that deeper, when we talk about mistrust, if you don't understand why black families don't mistrust medical professionals, I want you to Google the Tuskegee experiment. Next, Google Henrietta Lacks. right? And more recently, you didn't see black people running to get this coronavirus vaccine because of these things, okay? And a lot of people are like, why? Why wouldn't you get the COVID vaccine? Well, research shows, haven't had really good history with trusting, medicine. So again, it's not that, it's just mistrust, right? We have to acknowledge that it's there. And I think if you are not a practitioner of color, but you have a client who is black or a client who is a minority, acknowledge that, right? Because 9 times out of 10, there's just, like I said, you're just not going to always find what you want in a therapist as far as one who looks like you. If and when you do, that's amazing. But in the event that you have to seek help from someone who does not look like you, that therapist has to acknowledge that that mistrust is there. I understand that, all right? Let's work through that. Let's have that be part of our conversation. And then thirdly, you don't hear me. So what this has to do with is just the disparities in treatment altogether, right? We finally get our black men in for therapy, and then they're met with being overdiagnosed or misdiagnosed. A lot of times there's just disparities in treatment. Black men are more often diagnosed with schizophrenia instead of a mood disorder compared to white people who present with the same symptoms, okay? Medication and therapy is offered to black people less than white people. This leads, again, like I said before, to masking symptoms, self-medicating. Here we go with that cycle, back to substance abuse. And then overall inadequate access to mental health care, period. Sometimes it's about poor insurance, extremely high copays. I worked 3 jobs, and when I went to therapy myself, I was like, well, dang, the copay, right? I can't do this as often as I need to, as often as I want to. Imagine a family, like I said before, going through financial security, going through food security. And we say mental health is important, you got to get this together, but also, I got to feed my kids, right? So this little clip is, I don't want to say this wrong, from Trey Kearney. They created a podcast called Men Hurt Too. And this is just a couple of clips just showing the impact of childhood trauma on black men.
Black male therapist just that tagline alone has opened my eyes to all of the microaggressions that I've experienced in this field. I remember my first day at my internship, I walked in and I identified myself and was told by a Caucasian lady, wow, you dress nice for a black guy. Needless to say, that was my last day. Walked out right then and there.
Wow. So we're talking about a black man who is actually in the helping profession, right? He, quote, made it. And he walks in on his first day as an intern, and he's met with that. All right? I'll talk about microaggressions a little bit later, but that was a clip that I wanted to show you. So this is another clip just kind of describing the feeling of black men in some cases as well.
But with a lot of black men, they'll come into the office and they'll say something like, yeah, I had this problem. I was feeling really down. I just isolated myself for a little bit, put my head down, and just got to work. It's like, okay, well, who did you tell about your problems? Nah, nobody. Well, why didn't you tell anybody about your problems? I didn't want to be a burden. And then we will continue and we'll just keep reframing those thoughts so I can get an idea of what he means by being a burden. And it kind of distills down into this idea that I don't want to have to depend on anybody for anything, because if I do, then I'm somehow less than a man. And that doesn't work.
That doesn't work, right? And that goes again to kind of masking emotions, just dealing with it. And just feeling like if I do, as a black man, come out and say I need help, then I'm A, less than a man, but also I'm putting my burdens on someone else, right? So the purpose, of course, of all this, once we got through the review, is as you all in this room come to this conference for things that you want to take back, I want to give you tools. I want to give you ways to help, no matter what role you're in. And if you can't use the tools, share it with someone else. I want us to focus on that next. So when we talk about implications, it is so important that we are intentional on protective factors, on bringing more protective factors in for our young black boys, right? We talk about that at school, we talk about that at home, we talk about that in the church. So putting them in situations where they can have healthy practices, family support, regular school attendance, and talking to families about how important those things are. Because the more protective factors that we have, the less our risk is, right, for developing mental illness or any of those things. And the opposite, of course, is risk factors. So the more the more that we try to increase those protective factors, we also have to try to decrease those risk factors. Okay. Teaching mental wellness at a young age. I fortunately work in a school district that devoted millions of dollars to purchasing a social emotional learning curricula for every student in our district of 42,000 students. So our high schools all have an SEL curricula, our middle schools all have one, our elementaries all have one. So every student has access. That's amazing. However, we have to make sure that those SEL curriculums look like our boys. We have to make sure that those lessons include some of those situations that we talked about before. Okay? So I can learn how to manage conflict and I can learn about self-awareness, but what about all this other stuff that happens just in my home because I'm a black boy? Okay, so sometimes we have to take those SEL lessons and add to it, take away from, spice it up a little bit. But it's so important that we teach those things at school because all kids have to go to school, right? But making sure that those lessons are specific to black males and minorities when need be. We need to have parent trainings alongside our educators. Everybody, if you work in a school, I was a school social worker first in 2008, and everybody has to take, the regular training, slips, trips, and falls. Don't stand on the ladder. Walk slowly when it's a puddle. Now we're including those trauma trainings, which is great, right? So every teacher and staff member at our district has to take a training about trauma-informed care. But what about training our parents, right? Why haven't we offered these trainings to parents? Why can't we teach them about what trauma looks like? Why can't we teach them the importance of mental health? So making sure that we offer those to our parents as well is so important. They need to know the signs and symptoms of trauma, the effects of trauma, and then bringing training to them. Sometimes our parents aren't really excited about coming to the school building for their own, maybe, reasons, right? And so why can't we bring those trainings to community centers, to churches, where we know that parents will show up? Also, we have to think outside the box, right? As clinicians, especially, who said that therapy has to be done in a stuffy office with a cute couch and a lamp? If we know that our clients, especially our black men, will show up at the community center or at church, at barbershops, we can take therapy to them, right? Consider the location, meet clients where they are, normalize mental health, just having that conversation, and then finally just ask, where would you feel more comfortable talking about this? When I was a school social worker, I started in elementary, then went to high school. My high school kiddos, my black boys would not come into my office because it said social worker. I can't trust you. But what they would do is walk with me in the hallway and talk, right? A lot of black boys, a lot of men, period, don't like a little eye contact when we talk. So walking side by side, I got a lot of information, from my black students, my black boys. Or going to the gym, just getting them active, getting them movement, involved. So it doesn't have to be in a stuffy office, right? That medical building is pretty intimidating, especially for a black man starting out his therapy journey. Take it out of there if you need to. A lot of times that's what the barrier to therapy is, so remove those barriers, remove those. For providers, it's important that we are being trauma informed, right? I said this earlier, but making sure we are asking the question, what happened to you, as opposed to what did you do? You get a completely different response, and it's a much more understanding of a question. Systems theory. We have to think about what's influencing our clients, especially when we talk about incarceration. It's amazing, right? You've done your time, you come out, but then you're coming back to the same situation, the same environment. We're going to get the same result if we don't put something in place. So really figuring out what is influencing our black boys. Is it family? Is it friends? Is it media? And really trying to utilize what we know in order to treat appropriately. Educate and advocate. This is our opportunity as social workers to educate and advocate for our clients and our clients' families, right? Whatever we know, we need to share with them. And then again, asking questions and listening, right? Ask your clients and really, really hear what they're saying. And remember that what works for one client may not work for all. Okay? And then we have these lovely things called assessments and questionnaires. The ACE, I'll talk about, I already heard something. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. This is kind of really the tool that I want to give you. It's an ACE, a little revised, right? Sorry, my mouse isn't clicking. All right, so going beyond that, if you are a parent of a black boy or a parent that just, may have experience with working with black children, black boys, talk about trauma and mental health. What happens in the family does not always have to stay in the family, right? The more that we do that, the more that, we can have our young boys growing up and saying, well, yeah, my mom always asked me questions about how I was feeling, but that's normal to them now because they hear that all the time. So think about incorporating that early, and it doesn't have to be the words, how's your mental health, but finding a way to have that conversation and bring it in. And imagine having a young boy hear that from an older man, right? Talk about that and how powerful that would be. If you are an educator, you have to know the signs as well. And if you see something, say something. I don't know how many teachers, the signs that they see are, well, he threw a chair, and it almost hit me, so he needs to go. That's what they see. But really, did you also see that when you got close to him and he freezed, it's because maybe, you're making him nervous for another reason, right? We trigger and try and re-traumatize our students all the time. And sometimes we don't know it. A lot of times I know some students who, I don't want you to get very close to me because you smell just like my perpetrator. You are wearing the exact same outfit that my mom had on when she beat me. Some of those situations you're not going to know. So a student running from you or cringing or throwing something is his defense mechanism to try to make him feel safe. Okay, so instead of punishing that student for the behavior, let's figure out what the function of that behavior is. What truly is the reason for that behavior? A lot of times teachers, we're not expecting you to do that part, get that deep, but we do have plenty of resources in your schools to take that student to, or even have a conversation with. This is what I saw, but I know that there's something deeper, right? So having that conversation with your school social workers, your counselors, whoever's in the building that's trained to help with that. And as the community, of course, it takes a village to eradicate the stigma of mental health. So using the community, using the resources that are available, and absolutely getting involved with that. So I want to make this personal. It is very hard to listen to these trainings all morning. The presenters will talk about something, and there's a student or a client that pops in your head like, oh yeah, I know that one. So I'm going to make this personal for us, and I'm going to introduce you to Barry. Barry is one of my closest friends. Barry is an amazing person who I love very much and would give you the shirt off his back. Barry is someone who was not dealt a very good hand when he was born, black and male. And so I'm going to go through his timeline. We're going to kind of talk about his life and his adult outcomes. And I want you to think about your Barry, all right? Because everybody has a Barry. So this is kind of your trigger warning. His story is not the greatest. So if you need to take care of yourself, please do so. At 6 years old, that was the onset of sexual abuse for Barry when he was 6. When Barry was 8, his parents divorced. When Barry was 10 years old, he walked into a room right after a close family member had shot himself in the head. When Barry was 14, he was on the football team, finally got some community, but every time he went to an away game, the away players would call him the N-word repeatedly at the games. When Barry was 17, he became an unaccompanied minor. Mom said, you know what, I'm moving west. Do you want to stay or go? Barry chose to stay, moved in with a coach, football coach, and basically had to find his way to college, find his way through college as an unaccompanied minor. When he did get to college, he was harassed by police, campus police, just because he was walking across campus and he was black. So, Barry as an adult, let me mention this. Barry never sought treatment, never got treatment for any of these situations. Never saw a counselor, never saw a therapist, okay? So all these traumatic situations go untreated. And now as a 40-something-year-old adult, he's had countless failed relationships, inability to trust people, especially women, symptoms of anxiety, depression, and physical health issues, obesity, other conditions. So again, the example of untreated childhood trauma leading to poor outcomes in adulthood, right? That's my Barry. I'm going to make it personal again and tell you a little bit about me. I'm not a black man, but I'm going to relate this to, oh yeah, surprise. Relate this to just minorities in general, right? So this is a picture of Cabela's. And like I said, I'm from Kentucky, so I don't know what's in Mississippi or what's wherever y'all are from, but Cabela's is like a, I say wildlife, but it's like an all-purpose store you go to get stuff, right, Bass Pro. Well, I obviously didn't know much about Cabela's, but I was going fishing. Surprise, surprise, black people do fish in Kentucky. I was going fishing, so I wanted to buy a new fishing pole. I wanted to buy some worms, okay? I walk into Cabela's, and all of it, just automatically, as soon as I walked in, I get these stares like, you in the right store, right? And I'm thinking, okay, well, my outfit's not really the cutest because I am going fishing, so maybe I just look a mess. Let me just keep on walking to the fishing pole department. I'm there trying to pick out a cute fishing pole because I got to look cute while I'm fishing. And I look up, and there's an employee there just kind of looking at me out of the corner of his eye. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Walk over to the worms. I look up again. Oh, here he comes. And I'm like, do you really think I'm going to steal a fishing pole? Like, where is it going to go? So I had the choice to make: either confront this young man about what I know is happening, or just buy my pole, buy my worms, and leave. I chose to do the second, and I've never been in Cabela's again. I've been outside because there was a coffee shop there that I like, but I will not step foot inside Cabela's again. Now, do I think every Cabela's is like that? Absolutely not. But that's my experience, and I will remember that. Right? Next, I graduated from a small liberal arts university in Lexington. It's called Transylvania University. Now, if I'm not in Kentucky, the first thing people say is Dracula? Like, vampires? No. But if you are from Kentucky and you do know what Transylvania is, you know, when I used to say that's the college that I graduated with, the first thing that I was met with, oh, you must have got a basketball scholarship. Because it's a very expensive school. It's a very small school, and, you know, the rich white people go to that school. So you must have got a basketball scholarship. I don't know how many times I've been asked that question, right? Or the good old, oh my gosh, you're so articulate. What does that even mean? We heard how many accents today? You know, as presenters talking about how people sound. It's, you know. And then finally, imagine walking into your eye doctor. First thing they do, of course, after the puff in your eye, but you sit down, they put up a sign on the wall, and they say, read the letters out loud. Imagine walking in, and your eye doctor says, read the letters out loud. I'm going to let that sink in. Now, if you don't see it, ask your neighbor. So, a lot of these situations, the racial profiling, the microaggressions, they don't happen to me every single day. They don't happen to black men every single day. But they happen way more than need be, right? And at so much that it's important to talk about, right? It's important to address in the event that you are working with a black male client. These are the experiences that they have. So thinking about that, let's go back to this little ACE study we talked about. Now, just a quick little recap. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire, a lot of medical professionals, mental health professionals use this to formulate their treatment plans, right? But did you all know that the ACE originated from a weight loss study? Dr. Folletti was really trying to figure out, there was a group of people in this study that were doing very well, that were losing weight, but they kept dropping out. So he was like, well, what's going on with this group? So the more he researched, the more he dug into this small group, he realized they were masking, they were using food to mask a traumatic sexual event, okay? So he did a little bit more research, and he said, oh my gosh, so there are more events that possibly happen in childhood that affect adulthood outcomes, right? So he created this 10-question survey that addressed childhood abuse, whether it was physical or emotional or mental abuse, or excuse me, social abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, whether it was physical or emotional, household dysfunction, mental illness, incarceration of a relative, mother treated violently, all these questions. You know the 10 questions that are on the ACE, right? Now, when you look at this and you think about Barry's story, something's missing, right? You think about if we have clinicians that are just using this one questionnaire to formulate my treatment plan, you're missing an entire story. You're missing the impact of daily microaggressions. You're missing the impact of racial profiling. You're missing the impact of negative interactions with police, and even just the fear of driving or just living while black. So you're using this tool that is whitewashed to formulate my treatment plan? And then if you take it beyond black families, right? We have families who are living with the trauma of having to flee from a war-torn country. Families who are being threatened to be deported every single day. Families who maybe experienced genocide in their country. And even more. We could continue to expand this, right? Even beyond our black families. So when we think about this, I decided to create a cultural trauma questionnaire, which is not, I think, who said this earlier? Maybe Dana. Not rocket science, but it's just 4 additional questions to ask your clients, your black clients, especially your black men, in addition to the ACE. You can start with the ACE. Great. It's a great tool. Thank you so much. But what about asking your black men this question? Were you ever called a racial slur? Actually, let me skip. If you want to look at this, scan this so you can see it close. Because I didn't realize the print was a little small, sorry. I'll give you a chance so you can see it up close. Everybody get it scanned? Oh, the Wi-Fi. Well, did you get it? And you'll have access to this after, but I wanted you to have it in front of you while I read the questions, if you could. Excuse me, I have it here, so I'll go ahead and read it. The first question, were you ever called a racial slur to your face with the intent of degrading you or hurting your feelings, or indirectly, but still aware that the slur was being used? I literally told this story to somebody the other day. We have a well-known restaurant in one of our neighborhoods. It's called Drake's or Malone's. I think it's just local. And you know, sometimes you're out to eat with your girls, your boys, and afterwards you go out to the parking lot. You don't really always just get right in the car. You want to talk, extend the conversation. Well, this restaurant, apparently everybody wanted a parking space that day because I must have been taking too long to get in my car because someone drove by and called me the N-word. Because the only reason why I can think is because I wouldn't get out of the parking space, but again, if we're not addressing things like this that happen more often than a lot of people think, you're missing out when we talk about treating our black clients. Next question. Did you ever have a negative experience with the police while being pulled over with no probable cause, or excessive force was used to detain you or a family member? Yes or no? Unfortunately, this is the story for a lot of our black men. And that's what I mean when I say driving while black. You fit the description, right? And having that happen one time is traumatic, but to have it happen repeatedly, you know, a lot of us really tense up when I didn't do a thing wrong. I put my blinker on, but just because there's a police officer beside or behind me, still you just get that emotion, that feeling in you, like, oh my gosh. Number 3, has anyone made comments to you that could be considered microaggressions? Yes or no? Number 4, have you ever felt stress from repeatedly seeing racially traumatic events in the news, or family members or friends being killed or targeted for being black? I say 4 simple questions, but they are heavy questions, okay? I can answer, that's your score, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. You get a point for each one. Just like the ACE, you get a point for every ACE experience that you had, right? So what you do, my 4 completely changed my ACE score, because my ACE score might not have been so high, and so my therapist may treat me thinking, oh, you know, she's not too bad off. Oh, but what about this one, okay? And so this, including the ACE questionnaire, adding those scores together, just helps you paint a better picture for how to truly treat a black male client, okay? My goal one day in life, if you need to scan that, there it is again. My goal one day in life is to get a cultural trauma questionnaire for Latina families, for Asian families, for Native Americans, because each of those groups has their own set of cultural stuff that comes with them, right? The fear of being deported or being deported, deportation. A lot of situations that we could kind of go down in each of those groups. We could have a set of questions for them as well to add. So I don't want you to think that this is, you know, limited to that. That's my goal one day. What'd you say? Yes, exactly. Women. We could go on and on. And until that's done, I'm sure there's some out there. You all as clinicians, we know that there are other things going on besides what that ACE is asking. So be open to having that conversation. Don't shy away from it. Don't be fearful of it. So I also created, this is literally just a Canva document, right? Once you have all the ACE questions answered, once you have considered the cultural trauma questionnaire, you can kind of formulate your student, well, I did this for a student, but your client intervention plan when we talk about trauma, okay? So we can list protective factors, we can list potential ACEs, then you include those cultural considerations, and then you can start with next steps. So we're going to do this for Barry. Barry's the first little guy in the front. If y'all can yell really loudly, what are some protective factors? Surprisingly, he had a few. I know I told you the bad part, but what are some protective factors that we heard for Barry? He had a coach, the desire to go to college, resilience, what'd you say? Social involvement, yep, absolutely. This is so small, I'm sorry. Positive role model, involved in sports, accepted into college, regular attendance, okay? So there are good things about our clients. There are good things about our black boys. Yes, they can come with some traumatic situations, but let's find the protective factors. Let's find those positive things and praise that and increase that. All right, we know the potential ACEs. I think I told you all those. The sexual emotional abuse, divorce, death of a loved one, neglect, family issues. What'd you say? Harassed by police. Yep, I don't even think I could squeeze that one in there. Yep. What'd you say? Being cursed at. Yep. Unaccompanied. So family dysfunction. What'd you say? Maltreatment. Oh, yes, there you go. No treatment, absolutely. Sorry, I was squinting, I couldn't see her. So we know the 10 questions on the ACE, right? We get those from that. So thinking about the cultural considerations that are not on the ACE questionnaire, racial profiling, microaggressions, being called racial slurs, negative interactions with the police, right? So again, when we write this out for your client, for your student, we have to include those things. Because not until you include everything can we move on to those next steps, okay? Now, whether you are clinically trained to do some of these that I put on here for next steps, that's okay if you're not, but you will and can find something that works for that client. So some of the next steps that I put, consider a male therapist, if only, right? It's like a unicorn, a black male therapist. Sorry if you're in here. If you are, thank you. Keep coming. Yes, woohoo, give him a hand. We need you. I'll have Barry call you. Just kidding. Small groups. So imagine him being with other peers that look like him being with other peers who maybe have similar stories, right? And the empowerment in that, so he doesn't think that he's alone. He knows that he can do this. Specific trauma interventions. So we've got Target, which is trauma affect regulation, right? It's a really, really great school-based intervention for students who lived in with trauma. CBITS, cognitive behavioral intervention for trauma in schools, another school-based. And then TFCBT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So you're really focusing on getting his trauma narrative out and working with that. I was recently trained in ART, accelerated resolution therapy, and that would be perfect for Barry. All right? I don't know if anybody's been trained in ART. It's like EMDR on steroids. But in fact, the person who created ART was doing EMDR wrong, and they told her either do it right or create your own. So she created her own. She sure did. So if you don't know what ART is, I highly suggest you look into that. It's with the eye movements, and it opens up a part of your brain that you're blocking off, right? Imagine that for a young black boy. And then also adjust the meeting location. Barry's not going to come to my office, right? But Barry might meet me up the street somewhere else where he's more comfortable, okay? What I want us to do is scan this QR code so you can have a blank copy of the intervention plan. And if not, of course, you can get it later. Doesn't work? It says what? Some people got it. Okay. If not, I don't want to fall. You could also go to you know what a bit.ly code is? bit.ly, if you see that code down there. If you can't get it, we'll make sure you have a copy of it after. Oh, perfect, and it's on the website. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so if you don't have it, that's totally fine. Look up here. Let me go back. And what I want you all to do, if you're sitting with your colleagues, you can do this with your colleagues. If you're at home, do this at home, totally fine. I want you to take a few minutes and think of your Barry. Okay? Who popped up into your mind while I was telling you the story about Barry, while I was telling you my own story, right? Who popped up in your mind? And I want you to take a few minutes to think about his or her protective factors, their potential ACEs, their cultural considerations, and the next steps. Okay? I'll give you all a couple minutes. I should totally play music while we do this. All right. Everybody kind of thought through their trauma plan for their Barry? Is there anybody up close that has a loud voice that I can ask if they want to share about their Barry? And you can even say it to me and I can say it out loud. Anybody? Oh, and we got a mic right here. Thank you.
How do you want me to do? I don't even know if I need this.
Just a
but-
quick snippet, a couple of traumatic situations. No, be confidential, of course, and then we'll talk about what his protective factors are.
Okay, so my Barry, his dad left when he was 13, and his mom and him divorced.
Okay.
His mom found another man, which is my Barry's stepdad. Doesn't even talk to him in the house. He went down to Tuskegee, and he was part of the shooting.
Oh, wow.
He was a witness to that,
Okay.
and so
All right. Thank you for that summary.
yeah.
What are some protective factors?
Well, he does have support from his mom.
Okay.
She's there for him and his grandmother.
Perfect. Okay.
Dad's there, but he's not maybe the best role model support, but he's there
But
for
with
him.
some presence. Okay.
Yeah.
What about potential aces?
You know, the divorce, he felt abandoned
Yeah.
by his dad, unappreciated and not even wanted by his mom. And of course, being involved in the mass shooting.
Yeah. Any cultural considerations beyond that you need to consider when we talk about next steps?
Yeah, just the racial profiling for sure. He's been called slurs before. Some of the neighborhoods he hangs out in with friends might be a consideration.
If it's a negative
Yeah.
support system, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he has friends, but they are friends that like to go to the club and do other
Nothing wrong with
things.
club-
Yeah.
Kid-friendly clubs.
Like regularly.
Oh, got it. Okay. All right, so thinking of your Barry, does your treatment plan for him change? Knowing that you have added all those cultural considerations and included other things, what next steps?
I am definitely more mindful of what you presented today and coming and working with him, because I'm still working with him.
Awesome.
He's still seeing me. And so after everything that you talked about today, being able to look at it from a little bit of a different angle, he was so reluctant to open up.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one of those things to start getting him to even talk to me. But after the shooting, he became much more willing to share what happened to him.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
You are
Y'all give her a
welcome.
hand.
Thank you.
Like I said before, we all have a Barry, right? And I'm hopeful that hearing this and hearing just some other information and just those reminders will just kind of open your eyes and your hearts to other treatment options for your clients. So thank you for sharing your plan. So one thing I want to say, I am in therapy myself, and my therapist told me, you might as well just never expect to get ahead at work. I know. I was so mad at her. But the more we talked, what she meant was, honey, as soon as you delete one email, another one comes. And I'm stressed out because I used to have an Apple Watch that would ding every time someone texted or emailed. I would have my iPhone and my iPad and my MacBook. You know, I'm constantly reminding myself that I have work to do. But those emails are not going to stop coming, right? And so what she was trying to say is, instead of you looking at it like you're trying to catch up, and you're never going to be caught up in your own mind, right? Rewind, I was at another therapist who was trying to help me adjust to a very, very hard transition in my life, a divorce, right? That made perfect sense. Let me help you adjust to divorce, because it was inevitable. It was happening. There's no going back, right? What therapy should not be is a way to help people adjust to oppression, okay? We can't sit by and say, this is just how it is. This is just how it's going to be. As a therapist, as clinicians, as social workers, instead, let's consider all the things that we've talked about today. Let's kind of put together a plan to where I can advocate for you. I can educate and help us all get out of the situation that we're in, right? Instead of adjusting to all these situations that are happening. Some resources that I have included are the Healing Racial Stress Workbook for Black Teens. I'm so sorry, this is small. Skills to help you manage emotions, resist racism, and feel empowered. Black Families in Therapy, Understanding the African American Experience. And the Racial Handbook, practical activities to help you challenge privilege, confront systemic racism, and engage in collective healing. I've done several activities from the Racial Healing Handbook with colleagues who don't look like me, with people that I work with every single day, and as uncomfortable as it is, we have to have the conversations about it, right? It opens up our minds and understanding. So take a picture of those resources. And I'm a few minutes early, so I appreciate your all's time. If you have questions for me, I don't mind to hang out in the corner, pick a corner, is that okay? And I would love to chat with you all further. Also, anything that I shared today as far as resources, if you need them, of course, email me, I think from the website, but you can also find them on my website, sharikasmith.com. And I must love green, because I got on that green blazer. Thank you all so much.